Fear has a way of knocking on the door of our hearts. It whispers that we are not strong enough, not prepared enough, and not capable enough, It tells us that the obstacles ahead are too big and that the future is too uncertain. But there is a truth that stands higher than every fear we face. God is bigger than your fear. When fear rises in your life, it tries to make your problem look huge and your faith look small. But faith reminds us that the God who created the universe is still in control of our lives. The same God who spoke light into darkness, who parted seas, and who raised the broken is the same God who walks with you today. If God is greater than the universe, then he is certainly greater than the fear in your heart. Fear often comes when we focus on our limitations. We look at our past failures, our present struggles, and the uncertainty of tomorrow. But God never asks us to trust in our own strength. He asks us to trust in his power. When you shift your focus from the size of your problem to the greatness of your God, fear begins to lose its power over you. Another thing about fear is that it tries to stop your progress. It keeps you from stepping forward into the purpose and opportunities God has prepared for you. Fear says, stay where you are. Don't take the risk. But faith says, step forward because God is already there. When you trust God, you realize that the path ahead is not walked alone. Sometimes God allows us to face situations that feel overwhelming so that we can learn a deeper truth. Our strength comes from him. When we feel weak, we discover how strong God really is. When we feel uncertain, we learn how faithful he truly is. So the next time fear comes knocking at your door, don't let it control your life. Instead, remind yourself that God is bigger than your worries, bigger than your doubts, and bigger than every challenge you will ever face. When you walk with faith, fear may still appear, but it will never have the final word. Fear has a powerful way of shaping how we see the world around us. When fear enters the mind, it does not simply appear as a small thought. It begins to grow and influence everything we focus on. It magnifies problems until they look larger than life. A challenge that once seemed manageable suddenly appears impossible. A situation that might have required courage now seems overwhelming. Fear enlarges the obstacle in front of you and at the same time shrinks your confidence within you. This is the nature of fear. It takes a real situation and stretches it beyond its true size. When people focus only on their problems, those problems begin to dominate their thoughts. Every conversation, every decision, and every moment becomes colored by worry and anxiety. Fear convinces a person that the obstacle is too great, the circumstances are too complicated, and the future is too uncertain. When that happens, the mind begins to believe that there is no way forward, but faith changes the way we see things. Faith does not deny that problems exist. Instead, it changes the perspective through which we look at those problems. Faith reminds us that the power of God is greater than the power of any challenge we may face. While fear magnifies the size of the problem, faith magnifies the greatness of God. When a person lives by fear, their attention stays fixed on the storm around them. They study the difficulty, they analyze the danger, and they imagine the worst possible outcome. The mind becomes filled with what-if questions. What if things go wrong? What if I fail? What if I cannot overcome this situation? These thoughts create a cycle where fear feeds itself, becoming stronger each time we focus on the problem. Faith breaks that cycle. Faith shifts the focus from the storm to the one who has authority over the storm. Instead of constantly looking at the problem, faith encourages the heart to look at the character of God, his power, his faithfulness, and his promises. When we begin to focus on God's ability rather than our own limitations, the problem that once seemed enormous begins to look smaller. Think about how perspective works. If you hold something very close to your eyes, it appears much bigger than it really is. But when you move it farther away, you can see its true size. Fear pulls problems close to our minds so that they appear overwhelming. Faith steps back and places God at the center of the picture. When God is placed in the right position, everything else falls into its proper scale. Many times people underestimate how powerful their focus can be. What you constantly think about becomes what shapes your emotions. If you spend all your time thinking about your fears, your worries will naturally grow stronger. But when you choose to focus on the greatness of God, His wisdom, His strength, and His ability to guide your life, your faith begins to grow. Faith is not simply a feeling that appears automatically. It grows when we intentionally remind ourselves of who God is. It grows when we remember the ways He has helped us in the past. It grows when we recognize that the same God who has carried us before is still present in our lives today. Each time we choose to trust God instead of surrendering to fear, our perspective begins to change. Fear says the obstacle is bigger than your future. Faith says God is bigger than the obstacle. Fear says the situation cannot change. Faith says that nothing is impossible for God. Fear tries to convince us that we are alone in the struggle, but faith reminds us that God walks with us even in the most difficult moments of life. When faith becomes stronger than fear, the way we respond to challenges begins to transform. Instead of being paralyzed by worry, we move forward with confidence. Instead of allowing anxiety to control our decisions, we trust that God is guiding our steps. Instead of focusing only on the size of the problem, we begin to focus on the greatness of the one who holds our lives in His hands. In that shift of focus, something remarkable happens. The problems may still exist, the challenges may still require effort, and the path ahead may still require courage. But the heart no longer feels defeated before the journey even begins. The heart becomes steady, not because the problem has disappeared, but because faith has reminded us that God is far greater than anything we face. One of the greatest struggles people face in life is the tendency to rely completely on their own strength. From a young age, many are taught that success depends on personal ability, intelligence, and determination. While effort and responsibility are important, there comes a point where human strength alone is not enough. Life eventually presents challenges that cannot be solved simply by working harder or thinking smarter. In those moments, the difference between fear and peace often comes down to one simple question. Where are you placing your trust? When people rely only on their own strength, every challenge feels heavier. Every obstacle becomes a test of personal ability. If the problem is larger than what they feel capable of handling, fear quickly takes control. The mind begins to race with doubts. What if I cannot fix this? What if I fail? What if I don't have what it takes? When confidence is based only on personal strength, it becomes fragile because human ability has limits. When there are moments in life when those limits become very clear, unexpected situations arise, plans fall apart, circumstances change in ways that cannot be controlled. In those moments, people often feel overwhelmed because they realize that their own strength is not enough to carry them through the situation. But this realization is not meant to lead to despair. Instead, it is an invitation to place trust in the strength that is far greater than our own. Trusting in God's power means recognizing that our abilities are not the ultimate source of our security. It means understanding that while we may not have the answers, God does. While we may feel weak, God remains strong. While we may not see the path forward, God already knows the direction our lives should take. This kind of trust changes the way a person approaches challenges. Instead of feeling pressured to solve everything alone, the heart learns to depend on God's guidance and wisdom. Trusting God does not mean ignoring responsibility or refusing to act. Rather, it means moving forward with the confidence that God's power is working beyond what we can see. Many times people misunderstand what it means to trust God. They assume it means doing nothing and simply hoping things will improve, but real trust is active. It involves taking steps of faith while believing that God is directing those steps. It means doing what we can while acknowledging that the final outcome rests in God's hands. When people rely only on themselves, their perspective becomes narrow. They see only the resources they personally possess. They measure every situation according to their own skills and limitations. But when trust is placed in God, the perspective becomes much broader. Suddenly, the possibilities are no longer limited to human ability. God's wisdom, timing, and power become part of the equation. Another important truth is that God often works through our weakness rather than through our strength. When people feel strong and capable, they sometimes forget their need for God. But when they feel weak, they become more open to seeking His help. In those moments of humility, people begin to experience a deeper connection with God's presence and guidance. Weakness does not disqualify a person from moving forward in life. In many cases, it becomes the very place where God's strength is revealed most clearly. When someone moves forward despite feeling uncertain, relying on God rather than on their own ability, they begin to discover that divine strength can accomplish what human strength cannot. Trusting God also brings peace to the heart. When a person believes that everything depends entirely on their own performance, the pressure becomes exhausting. Every decision carries anxiety. Every mistake feels devastating. But when trust is placed in God, the heart learns to rest in the knowledge that He is guiding the process. This trust does not remove every difficulty, but it removes the feeling of carrying those difficulties alone. It replaces the burden of self-reliance with the assurance that God is present and active. Even when the path ahead is unclear, the heart can move forward with courage because it knows that God's power is greater than any challenge that may appear. Over time, people who learn to trust God discover something remarkable. The situations that once seemed impossible begin to unfold in unexpected ways. Doors open when none seem to exist. Strength appears in moments when weakness once dominated. What seemed overwhelming becomes manageable, not because human ability suddenly increased, but because trust allowed God's power to take its rightful place. Fear has a subtle but powerful influence on the direction of a person's life. It hardly appears in obvious ways at first. Instead, it begins quietly in the mind, planting small doubts and hesitations. It whispers that the risk is too great, the timing is not right, or the outcome may lead to failure. Over time, those whispers become barriers that prevent people from moving forward. Fear does not always force someone to turn back. Often, it simply convinces them to stand still. When a person allows fear to control their decisions, progress begins to slow down.
Opportunities appear, but hesitation takes over. Dreams exist, but they remain unpursued.
Potential is present, but it stays hidden beneath layers of uncertainty. Fear convinces the heart that staying in a familiar place is safer than stepping into something unknown. As a result, people sometimes spend years remaining in situations that no longer help them grow, simply because fear tells them that moving forward is too dangerous. The challenge with fear is that it often disguises itself as caution. It presents logical reasons for avoiding change. It reminds people of past disappointments and warns them not to repeat those experiences. It magnifies every possible negative outcome while ignoring the possibilities that could lead to growth and success. Because of this, fear can feel convincing and even responsible, when in reality it is quietly holding a person back from the future that could be waiting ahead. Faith operates in a completely different way. While fear focuses on potential failure, faith focuses on purpose. Faith understands that growth rarely happens within the boundaries of comfort. Progress requires movement, and movement requires courage. When people choose faith, they acknowledge that the path forward may not be completely clear, but they believe that God is guiding their steps. This belief gives people the strength to take action even when uncertainty exists. Faith does not promise that every step will be easy, or that every plan will unfold perfectly. Instead, it provides the confidence that God's presence will remain constant regardless of the circumstances. That assurance becomes the foundation that allows people to move forward despite the presence of fear. Many individuals miss meaningful opportunities in life because fear convinces them they are not ready. They believe they need more experience, more resources, or more certainty before taking the next step. While preparation is valuable, there are moments when waiting too long becomes another form of avoidance. Fear keeps moving the starting line further away, creating the illusion that the perfect moment has not yet arrived. Faith recognizes that progress often begins before everything feels completely secure. It encourages people to take responsible steps forward while trusting that God will provide guidance along the way. Instead of demanding perfect clarity before moving, faith accepts that understanding often grows after the journey has begun. Another way fear stops progress is by reminding people of their past failures. It replays memories of mistakes and disappointments, suggesting that future efforts will lead to the same results. This mindset traps individuals in a cycle where past experiences dictate future possibilities. Fear tries to convince them that because something did not work before, it will never work at all. Faith breaks that pattern by introducing hope. It acknowledges past difficulties but refuses to let them define the future. Faith believes that growth can come from failure, wisdom can come from mistakes, and new opportunities can emerge even after previous setbacks. With faith, the past becomes a lesson rather than a prison. When people choose faith over fear, their perspective on risk begins to change. Instead of seeing every challenge as a threat, I begin to view challenges as opportunities to develop strength and character. Each step forward becomes an act of trust that God is working behind the scenes, opening doors and shaping the journey. This mindset creates momentum. Small steps lead to larger steps. Courage grows with each decision to move forward. What once seemed intimidating gradually becomes manageable as confidence develops. The person who once hesitated begins to discover abilities and opportunities that were hidden while fear was in control. Progress does not require the absence of fear. Fear may still appear from time to time, raising questions and doubts about the path ahead. The difference is that faith refuses to let fear make the final decision. Instead of surrendering to hesitation, faith encourages action rooted in trust. When people allow faith to guide their choices, they begin to move toward the purpose that God has placed within their lives. Dreams that once seemed distant become goals worth pursuing. Opportunities that once seemed intimidating become pathways for growth. The future that once appeared uncertain becomes a journey of discovery, shaped by courage, trust, and the willingness to step forward even when the road ahead cannot be fully seen. Difficult situations have a way of revealing what is truly happening inside a person's heart. When life is comfortable and everything seems to be moving smoothly, it is easy to feel confident and secure. Plans or working circumstances appear stable, and the future seems predictable. In those moments, people often feel strong and capable because nothing is challenging their sense of control. But when unexpected problems appear, everything begins to change. Challenges expose the limits of human strength and force individuals to confront realities they may have never faced before. It is in those difficult moments that many people begin to question their ability to move forward. Problems may appear larger than expected, and solutions may not be immediately clear. Stress increases, emotions become heavier, and uncertainty begins to fill the mind. What once seemed manageable suddenly feels overwhelming. Yet these very moments, while uncomfortable, often become the places where deeper spiritual understanding begins to grow. Difficult situations have a unique way of redirecting a person's focus. When everything is going well, people sometimes rely mainly on their own plans and abilities. They feel in control of their direction and confident in their decisions. However, when life becomes challenging, that sense of control can quickly disappear. Plans fall apart, unexpected obstacles appear, and individuals realize that their strength alone cannot carry them through every circumstance. Instead of being meaningless struggles, these moments often become opportunities to recognize how powerful and faithful God truly is. When people reach the limits of their own ability, they begin to understand the importance of depending on something greater than themselves. Difficulties create space for a deeper awareness of God's presence, guidance, and strength. Many people discover that their most meaningful spiritual growth happens during the hardest seasons of life. In moments of struggle, they begin to pray more sincerely, seek wisdom more intentionally, and reflect more deeply about the direction of their lives. Challenges slow life down enough for individuals to reconsider their priorities and rediscover what truly matters. During these seasons, God's strength often becomes visible in unexpected ways. Sometimes it appears through inner peace during stressful circumstances. Sometimes it appears through wisdom that helps guide important decisions. Other times it appears through supportive people who arrive at just the right moment to offer encouragement or help. These experiences remind individuals that they are not facing their challenges alone. Faith grows stronger when people witness how God works in the middle of their struggles. When someone looks back on a difficult period and realizes they were given strength they did not think they had, their confidence in God begins to deepen. Situations that once seemed impossible gradually become testimonies of God's faithfulness and care. Another important truth revealed through difficulty is that growth rarely happens in comfort. Just as muscles become stronger through resistance, character often develops through challenge. Patience grows when circumstances require waiting. Courage develops when situations demand bravery. Wisdom increases when mistakes and setbacks create opportunities to learn. Without these experiences, people might never discover how much they are capable of becoming. The strength that appears during hardship often remains hidden during easy times. Difficult situations force individuals to rise beyond what they previously believed was possible. In the process, they begin to realize that God's strength can work through their weakness. Difficult seasons also reshape a person's understanding of faith. Faith becomes more than an idea or belief. It becomes a lived experience. When individuals trust God during uncertain circumstances, they begin to see how He provides guidance and support in real and practical ways. Their relationship with God becomes deeper because it has been tested and proven through experience. These moments of challenge also build resilience. Each time a person moves through a difficult situation with God's help, they gain confidence for future challenges. What once seemed overwhelming no longer feels impossible. The memory of past faithfulness becomes a source of encouragement when new problems appear. Instead of viewing difficulties only as obstacles, people begin to see them as opportunities for transformation. They realize that the hardships they once wished to avoid actually played a role in shaping their strength, patience, and faith. What seemed like a setback often becomes the very experience that prepared them for greater responsibilities and deeper purpose. Through these experiences, individuals gradually learn an important truth. God's strength does not always remove the struggle, but it provides the power needed to move through it. His faithfulness does not mean life will never become difficult, but it means that no difficulty will ever have the final word. In the middle of uncertainty, weakness, and challenge, people discover that God remains steady, present, and powerful enough to carry them through every situation they face. Fear has a powerful influence over the human mind because it naturally draws attention to problems, dangers, and uncertainties. When fear takes control of a person's thoughts, it begins to dominate how they see the world. Every challenge appears threatening, every obstacle seems larger than it actually is, and every decision feels heavy with risk. The mind becomes filled with worries about what might go wrong, and these worries slowly begin to shape emotions and actions. When fear becomes the center of attention, it starts to control behavior. People hesitate before making decisions. They avoid opportunities that could help them grow. They remain in familiar situations, even when those situations are no longer healthy or beneficial. Fear convinces them that staying in a limited space is safer than stepping into something new. Over time, this mindset can shrink a person's confidence and restrict the possibilities in their life. The reason fear gains so much influence is because of where the focus is placed. When people concentrate mainly on their problems begin to feel overwhelming. The mind keeps returning to the same worries again and again, analyzing every possible negative outcome. As this pattern continues, fear becomes stronger simply because it is constantly being fed by attention. However, something remarkable begins to happen when the focus shifts away from fear and toward God. The mind starts to view circumstances from a completely different perspective. Instead of seeing only the challenge, a person begins to remember the power and faithfulness of God. Instead of dwelling on uncertainty, they begin to reflect on the truth that God's wisdom and guidance extend far beyond human understanding. This shift in focus changes the emotional atmosphere within a person's heart. Fear loses its ability to dominate because the mind is no longer centered on the problem alone. When God becomes the primary focus, his strength, promises, and presence begin to shape how situations are interpreted. Problems may still exist, but they no longer appear unstoppable. Focusing on God also reminds people that they are not facing life's challenges by themselves. One of the greatest sources of fear is the feeling of being alone in difficult situations. When individuals believe that everything depends entirely on their own strength, the pressure becomes overwhelming. Every mistake feels dangerous and every uncertainty feels threatening. But when a person remembers that God is present and involved in their life, the burden begins to lift. The realization that God's wisdom and power are available brings comfort and confidence. Instead of feeling isolated, the person begins to feel supported by a strength far greater than their own abilities. This change in focus also transforms the way decisions are made. Fear-driven decisions are usually based on avoiding risk and protecting C. People ask questions such as, what if I fail? Or what if things go wrong? These questions keep the mind trapped in a defensive mindset where the main goal is simply to avoid difficulty. When God becomes the focus, the questions begin to change. Instead of asking only what might go wrong, people begin asking where God might be leading them. They start considering the possibilities that faith can open rather than the dangers that fear predicts. This perspective encourages courage, growth, and purposeful action. Focusing on God also strengthens inner peace. Fear thrives in environments filled with uncertainty and doubt. When the mind constantly imagines worst-case scenarios, anxiety becomes a constant companion. But when people spend time reflecting on God's character, his faithfulness, love, and power, the thoughts begin to settle. Peace does not come because every problem has been solved immediately. It comes because the heart trusts that God is capable of guiding the situation toward the right outcome. This trust quiets the constant noise of worry and replaces it with a sense of calm confidence. Over time, this practice of focusing on God reshapes a person's mindset. Fear may still appear occasionally, but it no longer holds the same authority it once had. Instead of controlling decisions and emotions, it becomes simply one voice among many and not the strongest one. Faith gradually becomes the louder voice. Faith reminds the heart of God's past faithfulness and encourages trust for the future. It helps people remember that no challenge is greater than God's ability to provide guidance, strength, and direction. When this perspective becomes part of daily life, fear loses its power to dictate how a person lives. Challenges are still faced, risks are still taken, and uncertainties still exist. But the heart moves forward with confidence because it understands that God is greater than any obstacle. By keeping attention focused on God rather than on fear, individuals begin to experience a freedom that allows them to live with courage, hope, and determination. The presence of fear may never disappear completely, but it no longer has the authority to control the path of a life that is guided by faith. One of the most important truths in life is that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Fear is a natural human response to uncertainty, danger, or the unknown, and it will always appear at critical moments in life. Every person experiences fear at some point, whether it is the fear of failure, rejection, loss, or the unknown future. Fear is not the problem. The problem arises when fear dictates your choices and prevents you from stepping forward into the purpose and opportunities that God has prepared for your life. When fear takes control, it often convinces the heart that it is safer to remain in the comfort zone, even when that comfort zone no longer nurtures growth or progress. People begin to focus on what could go wrong rather than what could go right. They replay past mistakes, overestimate potential dangers, and underestimate their own strength. In doing so, they give fear more authority over their lives than it deserves. Fear has a way of exaggerating the size of the challenge while shrinking the perceived ability of the individual to overcome it. Courage, on the other hand, requires a conscious choice to shift focus. It demands that the heart and mind stop magnifying the problem and begin magnifying the power, presence, and faithfulness of God. When courage rises, it refuses to let fear decide the next step. Courage acknowledges the risk but refuses to be paralyzed by it. It recognizes that God is greater than the fear, larger than the obstacle, and more powerful than any limitation that may appear. Courage is not reckless. It is deliberate reliance on a higher power, a deeper source of strength than one can generate alone. Taking action in the face of fear often requires preparation, prayer, and patience. Courage does not mean rushing blindly into a situation. It involves discernment, understanding, and careful thought. But the difference lies in the willingness to move forward even when the outcome is uncertain. Courage moves because faith has replaced fear as the guiding principle. It believes that God is already at work behind the scenes, orchestrating circumstances and providing guidance along the way. When fear says you cannot do this, courage responds, God can do all things and He is with me. Fear often tries to convince people that they are alone, that no one will support them, and that failure is inevitable. Courage counters this by reminding the heart of God's constant presence and the promise of His guidance. Courage understands that setbacks may happen, mistakes may occur, and challenges may persist, but these do not define the ultimate outcome. Faith-filled action rooted in courage allows individuals to move forward with confidence even when they feel weak or uncertain. One of the reasons fear has such a strong hold over people is because it attacks the imagination. Fear paints pictures of failure, loss, or humiliation, often exaggerating reality in the process. It tempts people to focus only on the negative possibilities, leaving little room for hope or vision. Courage fights this by redirecting the imagination to the greatness of God, the potential for growth, and the opportunities that lie beyond the current moment. When a person begins to imagine possibilities rather than just threats, courage naturally grows. Courage is also strengthened through experience. Each time a person takes a step forward in faith despite fear, confidence grows. Past moments of overcoming fear become reminders that God's power is real and His promises are true. These experiences build a pattern of resilience, proving that fear does not have the final word and that faith-fueled action can produce results even in difficult circumstances. Courage, like a muscle, becomes stronger the more it is exercised. Another important aspect of courage is perseverance. Fear may not disappear immediately, and challenges may not resolve overnight. Courage requires staying the course, continuing to move forward, even when the path is unclear. It understands that success is not always immediate, but progress comes through consistent trust and action. Fear may attempt to stop movement. Courage refuses to let hesitation dominate. It keeps the individual moving toward God's intended purpose. Step by step, courage also inspires others. When one person chooses to act despite fear, it often encourages those around them to step forward as well. Courage has a multiplying effect because it demonstrates that fear can be acknowledged but not allowed to control life. By modeling courage, a person becomes a beacon of hope and strength for others who may be struggling with their own fears. This influence is an extension of God's power at work through their life. Ultimately, courage is a spiritual principle rooted in trust. It is the conscious decision to believe that God is bigger than the fear, that His power is sufficient, and that his presence never abandons us. It teaches that fear may appear, challenges may arise, and uncertainty may exist, but none of these have the authority to stop God's plan from unfolding. Courage allows a person to move forward, pursue purpose, and embrace opportunities, not because fear is gone, but because faith and trust have become stronger than fear. Faith is not simply a belief that exists in theory. It is a practice that shapes how a person experiences life, especially when fear is present. Many people misunderstand faith as a passive state, something that requires no action or engagement. In reality, faith is active, dynamic, and often requires a conscious choice to trust God even when circumstances suggest otherwise. Fear, on the other hand, thrives on uncertainty, doubt, and the unknown. It is fueled by what could go wrong and by imagining the worst-case scenarios. Faith, when fully embraced, shifts the focus from what might fail to what God can accomplish. This shift is not automatic. It requires consistent attention, discipline, and intentionality. Fear often grows when a person fixates on their own limitations. It magnifies weaknesses, past failures, and uncertainties. When people feel powerless, fear seems overwhelming because it preys on the belief that they are alone in their struggles. Human strength, while valuable, has limits, and fear exploits those limits by convincing the mind that no solution exists. It thrives on isolation and uncertainty. The more one focuses on the problem instead of the power of God, the more fear grows. Thoughts spiral, and hesitation dominates, leaving even simple decisions paralyzed by doubt. The heart becomes burdened with worry, and the imagination paints frightening scenarios that may never materialize. Fear exaggerates obstacles while minimizing hope, creating a mindset where action seems impossible. Faith counters this by intentionally placing God at the center of attention, and when a person chooses to focus on God's character, power, and faithfulness, fear begins to lose its grip. Faith reminds the heart that the God who created the universe is not limited by human circumstances. The same God who has guided countless lives, worked miracles, and provided in impossible situations is still active and capable today. By redirecting attention from the problem to the provider, the mind begins to reframe the challenge. Obstacles remain real, but they no longer define the narrative. Faith shifts the lens through which life is viewed, emphasizing God's ability rather than human inability. Another critical element of faith is trust. Trust means believing that God is not only able to handle the situation, but that he is also already at work behind the scenes. While fear emphasizes uncertainty and delays action, trust encourages movement even when outcomes are unknown. Faith requires taking steps that may feel risky, uncomfortable, or uncertain, not because fear has disappeared, but because trust in God is stronger than the fear itself. Every act of obedience, every choice to move forward despite doubt strengthens faith and diminishes fear. Faith also transforms how setbacks and difficulties are perceived. Fear interprets obstacles as final, insurmountable, or threatening to personal security. Faith, however, sees challenges as opportunities for growth and for God's power to be revealed. Even when outcomes are unclear, faith believes that God is working toward a greater purpose. This perspective provides resilience, helping individuals recover from failure, adapt to unexpected circumstances, and continue moving forward without being paralyzed by worry. The practice of faith requires deliberate action. It is nurtured through prayer, reflection, and meditation on God's promises. It is strengthened through remembering past experiences where God has provided guidance, protection, and provision. Each step taken in faith builds confidence, proving that God's power is real and that trust in him produces tangible results. Over time, faith becomes a habit, a way of seeing the world and responding to challenges that transforms fear from a controlling force into a manageable presence. Faith also connects individuals to a broader reality beyond their own limitations. Fear isolates, convincing people that they are alone in their struggle. Faith reminds them that God is with them, guiding, protecting, and providing wisdom. This connection brings peace to the heart. Even when circumstances are difficult, the presence of God provides assurance that fear does not have the ultimate authority over life. Knowing that God's plan is bigger than any problem allows the heart to act with courage and confidence. Moreover, faith fosters perseverance. Fear often tempts individuals to quit, retreat, or avoid the challenge entirely. Faith, however, encourages endurance. It teaches that persistence grounded in trust in God can lead to breakthroughs, growth, and success that would otherwise remain out of reach. Faith allows individuals to move step by step, even in uncertainty, because it is anchored in a power greater than themselves. Ultimately, faith works as a stabilizing force that reshapes the mind and the heart. When fear appears, it is natural to feel anxious, uncertain, or hesitant. But faith intervenes by reminding individuals of God's greatness, His faithfulness, and His presence. By choosing to focus on God rather than on the problem, by taking steps of trust despite uncertainty, and by persevering through challenges, fear loses its ability to control life. Faith transforms fear from a paralyzing force into a signal that invites deeper reliance on God, turning moments of uncertainty into opportunities for growth, strength, and the experience of God's power at work in real and practical ways.